All right, then. Thank you so much for joining us on the Charlotte Black Film Festival. Great film that Mr. Rowan, Jonathan Rowan, did. So we're going to talk about the film, Jonathan Rowan and Arthur Horton. So Jonathan, why don't we just start just by introducing our guests? So Jonathan, why don't you just introduce us, tell us a little bit about you, and then after you finish, then Mr. Horton, you can tell us a little bit about you as it relates to this film. Hey, Jonathan.
Hi. Well, hello, everybody. My name is Jonathan Rowan. I am the writer, director, and producer of Man Down. And Man Down just pretty much discusses the experience of an officer of color who's involved with the shooting of an unarmed Black teenager and the ramifications of dealing with the tough choice of whether to stand on the side of being both either Black or blue, and that journey that main character goes through. I think that this film was a great experience to explore the narrative from the point of view of an officer of color. I really don't see that narrative a lot in the movies that are presented today. The movies tend to present the victim's point of view, and I thought it was interesting and important to also tell what other people experience as well.
Gotcha. Thank you. Mr. Horton, how you doing, sir? Tell us a little bit about you.
Okay, I presently live in Huntersville, North Carolina. I was employed with Charlotte Mecklenburg PD for 15 years, 10 of those years as a detective with the Violent Crimes Task Force. I left and joined the corporate sector and worked for a contract security company for 5 years, DSI Security, based out of Alabama. Presently, I do contract security with the NBA, the NBA security rep with the G League of the Greensboro Swarm.
Wow. Well, thank you. And for those who are watching, if you have questions, I guess Tommy will be able to navigate that, and we can get your questions answered. But Jonathan, very interesting. I watched it. I guess you packed a lot of emotion and a lot of stuff in there in that 15 minutes. So tell me, what prompted? Was there an event or anything that prompted you to come up with that storyline?
Yes, thank you so much for that question. Yes, I've had issues with police brutality involved, and from a personal standpoint within my family. One of my uncles was a victim of police brutality. So that's where the initial idea of this narrative came from. But also I have friends who are also police officers of color. So it was important that I wanted to dive deeper into that concept and see where that narrative goes, and also interviewing them and talking to a lot of them, just to seeing how they impact things in their mind was very important to this narrative, and something that I took into consideration when writing this. So that's the angle that I went with this. I wanted to go somewhere very interesting and unique.
Yeah, and Mr. Horton, since you were a former CMPD, a lot of talk now is talking about the mental health of police officers. And in the first few minutes of Man Down, you saw the other officer. He said he was in the doghouse with his wife, and he was looking for some action tonight. So so in the first few moments, it just set up to me that he was looking for some action, and then he was thinking about what's happening at home, that he was in the doghouse, and the partner said, "Happy wife, happy life." And he said, "Well, whose side are you on?" So, so talk to me about the mentality that when you start your shift, that are you in the mentality that everybody will be innocent until proven guilty, or are you in the mindset that I want some action tonight? Talk to me about that.
It's interesting that you bring up the mental health aspect of it, because I think that a lot of people forget that we are human, just like everyone else. Being in the doghouse, I would like to say that when I came, we have this opportunity to try to separate ourselves from our personal life and checking on that day of duty and forgetting about your personal life. However, we are human. It's interesting with Man Down, how it kind of sets up whether or not his total mindset is attributed to the end result. Could be. I think that innocent to proven guilty, I like to think that's 100%. However, I could go on and talk about a little. I don't want to get too deep into it, but I think that when the IA investigation probably was not privy to all that personal information that they had in that conversation inside the car or even at the dinner table, because I think that actually factors in probably to the outcome possible.
Yeah, and Jonathan, was that in your mindset that to show that the mental mentality of police officers, either they're dealing with home life and they're dealing with, they want some action on the streets. Was that intentional that you put that in the script? And what message did you want to put out by doing that?
Absolutely.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
It was important to humanize the characters and show that they're people and they're outside of their uniforms. So it's important to see different aspects of them, not only in the field, but also outside of the field. And mostly a lot of the film takes place outside of the field, beyond the initial, opening incident of the movie. So it was important to kind of just see the mental stress and the mental capacity that people deal with still being people, as we just mentioned, just to humanize the story a bit.
Yeah. Well, you wanted to say something, Mr. Horton?
No, I lost some of your commentary because I had a call in and I didn't actually hear what you had to say. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Gotcha. And Jonathan, I guess with the George Floyd murder, I guess we saw that a lot of police officers were speaking out against Derek Chauvin. And a lot of people thought that, wow, that now it is okay or it is accepted that if, that even though we wear blue, that we are still human. So talk to me about the thought process in making sure that the thought about it's okay that if your partner is a bad cop or is not following protocol, that it is okay to question that. But I guess in the end, in the Man Down, I guess that didn't happen, right?
Right. Without giving too much away,
right.
The main character, Alonzo, had the tough choice of, staying loyal to his partner during the investigation or, being a little bit more forthcoming, honest from his point of view, what happened. And in the end, he chose to just keep more of the loyalty, the code of blue, as most people do in society from the experience that we've had up until the George Floyd trial, right? That's something new that's been going on within the recent years that we've been seeing, depending on what's going on. So it was interesting that I gave more of a realistic approach, and how I got to that approach is really asking my friends who were officers of color, kind of like how that scenario would go in real life. And that's how I came to my scenario in the film.
Wow. And Mr. Horton, to talk to me, I guess men in blue, men and women in blue. I mean, how deep does that go? I mean, is that something that is taught that we support each other? Or is it said that in academy that if your partner is wrong, that partner is wrong? Talk to me about what goes on that, and where did that come from that we're going to support each other, no matter what? Talk to us about that. Take us inside the headquarters in the police academy.
It's interesting that you bring that up about some of these conversations, because in the academy, for me, I became a police officer at 32. And some of my colleagues were right out of college, 21, 22. So my mindset was a little different. So in the academy, there's never any training about supporting your fellow officer when he or she has done something wrong. It was clear for me as an individual that the people who work with me knew that I would not tolerate any of some of the things that you see now. If someone does something wrong, I've told those guys and women that, if it comes down between my job and your job, it would be my job, because I will say this, the years that I was there, those 15 years I was there, I never had an officer do something like Chauvin did. Because I can tell you personally, had I been there, if they had fired me, that would have been fine, but I would have pulled him off him. That's the mentality that I had. I can't speak for the whole department. But during the time I was there, I never had an incident like that. However, the blue line, I'm not naive, it's there. is there. I can speak of one particular incident that I had an IA investigation in reference to use of force. And a person that did not look like me prior to going into the interview actually asked me, "What do you want me to say?" I found that interesting, caught me off guard. And I told him, "Tell them what happened," because I knew that I was fine. Protocol, police, the way that we're trained, I was fine. However, had I bought into that and engaged in that conversation about him lying about something, that's when you kind of like cross the line. But in the academy, you're not trained to support the blue line. I think that I'm not saying that is a myth, but I think I can only speak for myself individually. I like to think that I police correctly. And there's some tense situations, even in Man Down. I will go to the end. I wanted to comment on the end, whether or not the guys, the one who made the shooting, who did actually shooting, whether or not that factor into the end result. I have children, and I tell them what to do and what not to do when you're pulled over, and I wouldn't say aggressive, that the kid pulling that handgun out, I mean, pulling out the cell phone, puts the officer in a really precarious situation. You know, Seeing with your eyes, brain attacking that and trying to make a decision very quickly whether or not that's a handgun or if that's a cell phone.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
I think, go ahead.
Yeah, that's interesting because I know here local leaders, I know the local NAACP president here, Reverend Corinne Mack, that she wanted to make sure or to ensure to raise the bar when it comes to officers say that they feel threatened. I guess that they use that so loosely that they feel threatened. So she wanted to raise the bar that, what do you mean that you feel threatened? If I, do like that to you, do you feel threatened? And is that gives you, the authority to shoot? So talk to me about that, when do you feel threatened? Because it's so interesting because my brother used to be a police officer in a Maryland State Police. And, we talk about this and the way people policed, like when you were on the streets is, in my mind, is totally different than how people are policing now. So talk to me about what would be your level that you would say that you felt threatened. Talk to me about that. When does it get to a point that when you were out in the streets that you felt threatened by somebody?
Wow. It's pretty clear to me that whether that person had a gun in his hand or even if he had a knife, but I would never have been that close to him in the first place. So if he had a knife and he pulled it out, that wouldn't have deemed for me to fire my weapon, because I always had a standard of how close I would be to an individual. Even in Man Down, it was only a suspicious person, okay? But you're still on alert. It wasn't like the call came out and said there's a murderer out there with a gun, he just killed someone. So that level of thinking is a little different. Suspicious person, going to grab his ID, ascertain who he is, where does he live at, where he's going. I might have gone to the point and say, "You mind if I search your bag?" If he'd said no, I'd be on your merry way. But I think when I was in Charlotte, I worked the North Corridor, and it was pretty rough over there. I will say that it really helped me become a better police officer. And what I mean by that I got kind of thrown into the fire. So you build that repetition over and over in high stress situations. To answer your question, the cell phone obviously doesn't deem that you use deadly force.
Yeah.
Him pulling it out very quickly, I will say that it's tough sometimes to try to visually catch up with the brain whether or not that is a handgun, because if he doesn't correlate that quick enough and it is a gun, then you're left with the question asking the officer, why didn't he fire his weapon? But either way, it's a tough situation, but that did not deem that he be shot. I think that even from the beginning of this conversation with the young man, it was going bad from the beginning which I think could have been handled totally different and never would have escalated to that.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And Jonathan, to talk to me, you talk to your friends who are police officers, I guess, on the West Coast. I guess in doing this film, did you reach out to like police officers like from all over to see if there's a common theme about what police officers think and feel, whether no matter what force you're on?
Yes, and actually, I'm originally from the East Coast. I'm from Louisville, Kentucky.
Okay.
So for a lot of people that I talk to are in that region still. So more so than where I'm at. Like I've talked to the officer that was on my set and things like that. But yeah, just to have a broader understanding, talking with different people and reaching out was definitely something that I did in doing my research before I did this narrative. So I think that was very important. But I think it's important on what Mr. Horton talked about is not in that moment of, the conversation already going bad. And I think that's the notion of that a lot of Black people have today with just their relationship with the police and just a fear and just an expectation of what's going to happen to you when you encounter an officer. I think that'd be interesting to dive into just those moments of how to approach both sides respectfully and just building a relationship so people can have more of an understanding or have more of a trust with police and not just see the lights, you just see fear, you just see the ramifications of everything that's portrayed to us in the media.
Yeah, exactly. And Jonathan, talk to me about the importance, because these are two Black officers approaching a Black suspect. We know about how white officers may have a stereotype of young Black men, but why was it so important, and what thought did you want to get out there that you used two Black officers and the same incident and outcome happened that people automatically think that it would happen if they were white officers? Talk to me about that stereotype and why Black people think that way of other Black people who look like them. Talk to me about the importance and what you want to get out by doing that.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. From my personal experience, just dealing with officers in general, I do have a natural fear of the police. And I have a greater fear when I've been pulled over for a ticket or whatever with a Black officer, because I don't really know how that's going to go and how he's perceiving me. I've had the experience of personally feeling a little bit more uncomfortable because I don't know if he has something to prove with everyone else. Like he can't treat me differently because of our uniquely Blackness together. So, or is he going to give me a break, because of my Blackness and what's going on? So I think that's important. But within my film, what I wanted to do that was interesting is, one cop is clearly African-American, the other cop is biracial. And we're really tackling levels of Blackness and levels of culture connection between the two. The biracial officer has more so cultural alienation, where he's trying to separate himself from his Blackness. So therefore, he's more harder on the gentleman that he's interrogating, whereas the other officer, who is more considered African-American Black, he is a little bit more compassionate and trying to understand the situation in between. So you have this dynamic of struggling in that moment between being Black and blue that is explored later on when we have that conversation on the patio later.
Yeah. Wow. And I mean, it was such a fascinating film. I hope everybody watches it. But I guess at the dinner table, I guess the theme, I guess he's married to a white woman, and I guess she felt good, or she felt that she was on the Black people's side just because she voted for Barack Obama, and she emphasized twice. So talk to me about that theme, about certain people think that just because of the actions, like you have Black friends and you vote for Black people, that you automatically get a Black card or you get invited to the cookout. Talk to me about what theme you wanted to express there.
Yes, that's always a common theme. And when I initially wrote that part, it was more so an internal joke that a lot of Black people, we experience, from other races, not sympathizing with our pain and the things that we go through as people, but claiming to be allies, but not really doing the work, not really using their privilege in a way to help us and instead of a way to just kind of say, oh, I'm on your side, but if it doesn't really affect me, it doesn't affect me. I feel like I do my part enough, was something that I wanted to express in that moment, in that sentiment, between that dynamic. And then also not being totally aware that you may be doing things to oppress people subconsciously, or, you know, being aware to the actions that you take as a person.
Yeah, sounds good. Sounds good. We have questions coming in. Please get your questions coming in. This question is for Mr. Horton. This question is, now that you are retired, what do you think CMPD needs to implement in order to restore community relations?
Good question. When I worked with CMPD, and as you from the area, so I worked at West Trade Street, Beatties Ford, Rosa Ferry, Wilkerson Boulevard. So, you know, the people that I unfortunately was arrested, I call it unfortunately, was a predominantly Black neighborhood. However, there was a lot of Black businesses there, entrepreneurship. So I made it my effort to know those individuals. I would go in, talk to them, the hairdresser, if you remember the beauty school that was there, they all knew me. And this was before community policing actually had kind of gotten ramped up. So they knew that, one, I was there to protect them. Two, they also knew that I was fair. And three, they knew that I would do my job if I had to arrest someone who broke the law. And I kind of simplified it like that. You know, people who, when I worked at Earl Village, if you remember Earl Village, largest public housing authority in Charlotte. I have a younger brother who retired also from Charlotte. Big family of police officers, great uncle. One of my twin sons is a police officer right now. But I remember coming at an academy and my younger brother telling me, he said, try to treat everyone the way that you would want to be treated. And it didn't take me long to realize what he meant by that, because the lower income individuals, there should not be a line drawn based on economic background. You know, people live there, and I try to treat them fairly as I could. So to try to answer your question, they have a long struggle here to try to install trust again. It's really because it's across the board, not only in North Carolina, all the way to the West Coast. And when you see those officers who make those really bad decisions, it affects all the police department. I don't know if there's one thing or two things that Charlotte can do to restore trust, but I do believe that you have to be involved in the community, and they have a long road ahead.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting. I'm going to say with you, Mr. Horton. I guess you said you were on the West Side. So talk to me about, did you have a preconception if you pulled over a Black guy, I guess with all the stereotypes and things like that? Did you have preconceptions, or did you stereotype, suspects who were Black? Talk to me about your thought process about that compared to if you pulled over a white person compared to pulling over a Black person.
I tried very hard to keep that on an equal basis. You know, the African American male driving the nice car with the tricked out rims and the big tires doesn't mean that he's a drug dealer, you know. Or you see the white guy driving the Mercedes. Do I treat him any differently because maybe he makes $100,000? I don't know what he makes, but I understand the question. There was always that internal struggle with me to try to be fair with everyone. You know, for the most part on the West Side, I knew who the guys who was slinging dope. I knew who they were, you know. But so it was very clear to me, in my mind, that I tried very hard to be fair to all of them.
Yeah, and was that hard? Was that, I guess, take me inside your mind. How did you decipher and how did you decide? Because at the end of the day, you want to be safe as well. So, talk to me about the struggle that went forth in your mind.
It was always the internal struggle. I remember in Earl Village, and the people who lived there gave me a hard time because of the color of my skin, and why are you working for, quote unquote, the white man? And for me, it's like, it's a job for me. You know, someone has to pay me, whether he is white or Black. So there were always internal struggles But that was a small percentage of people who felt like that. I think the majority of the people respected what I did, because it didn't take long for them to figure out what type of officer that I was. You get a reputation very quickly on how you do your job on the street, whether it's good or bad, and it goes a long way. And I think that even the bad guys knew that I would take them to jail if they broke the law. But I was fair about it. So
Yeah. Good, 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 good.
but I will say this on the flip side, though, there were some that I did with. I knew there were hard cases. I knew going into it, if I knew that I was getting ready to serve a warrant on an individual that I knew had been in and out of prison and has hurt people before, that mindset was totally different prior to going into, dealing with that individual.
Right. Gotcha. Gotcha. Good. Jonathan, talk to me about the importance of the community as far as with policing, because I know you had you showed the boy's mom, at that press conference and things like that. Why was it so important to make sure you have that community element in Man Down?
Yeah, two things with that. I think officers are integral to communities. I feel like, once upon a time, there were officers that were familiar with Black areas already, that you had that rapport where people feel comfortable and things. And then when you kind of like take people out of their elements and just put like someone who's unfamiliar to the neighborhood per se, they don't understand the people in the neighborhood. They don't know the people. Everyone can be on edge in that sense, and that can create a hostile environment versus officers who are used to the area, who are always there and building rapport with, the neighborhood kids. And, you see officers that play basketball with people and different things, and just building that connection. I think that's very integral to community, to have more of an understanding. So there's a level of trust there with the relationship between the citizens and the officers. In Man Down per se, these officers weren't really familiar with, the victim. He just was out his element, similar to Trayvon Martin, someone, who's foreign in that community. So he's looked as a trespasser. He's already stereotyped in a negative way. Rather, if they already knew Jerome, then that probably would have been a different situation, how that played out.
Yeah. Relationship is so important. Also talk to me about, with the George Floyd, we have like communities and people who have cell phones, and they always use cell phones. In fact, the person who got a Pulitzer Prize who filmed the George Floyd just wanted to talk about, but the only thing in the Man Down that they used the dash cam video. So talk to me about the importance of having those that technology to make sure that we can see exactly what the police officers are doing and hold them accountable. And I guess you did not, and talk to me about the thought process about not having a crowd nearby, holding the cell phone and say, leave Jerome alone, he's just going home. What was the thought process of not having that, but just able to use just the dash cam video to see who was right or wrong?
Thank you for that. That's a very interesting concept. The dash cam video was just like surveillance, in my opinion. That was the point of view if someone else was watching from afar instead of having people crowd around. In this story, once again, Jerome was foreign to that area. That wasn't a place that he normally visited. So that was an unlikely occurrence that happened. And so it'd be different if he was in his own neighborhood where, his community could rally around him and kind of like say, no, this is wrong. We know him and vouch for him. But since this was such a foreign entity, that this happened in, the surveillance is the only thing that is kind of like the true perspective from where this can be looked at, if that makes sense, instead of just listening to, a testimony from a Jerome or a testimony from Alonzo or a testimony for Officer O'Connor.
Yeah. And I like the way how you humanize one of the officers that, I guess the officer who shot the gun, he didn't have images of Jerome, but the officer who didn't pull the trigger had images of Jerome, haunting him and being there. Talk to me about why did you put that and why did you want to include that into the film?
I think that's very important to express the inner turmoil of Alonzo, the main character, what he's dealing with, and that he wanted to, in his mind, handle the situation a certain way. And once he stepped away from it, he lost control when he left them by themselves. So in a way, it's like inner guilt, turmoil for maybe if he would have done a little bit more, maybe if he sent Clark back and he stayed, maybe this wouldn't have happened. And, you know, almost inner conflict of the boy's ghost haunting him throughout the film as a tough choice of, you know, what you should do, what you shouldn't have done, and how this outcome could be different if it's done a different way.
Yeah, yeah, gotcha. Mr. Horton, you know, you were in the community, and I found it very, I guess, raw in the film. We're at the dinner table where the daughter questioned, you know, the police officer and things like that. And I know that. How did you react? And I don't know if this happened, but I guess if the community came at and attacked police officers, saying that you guys you have bad, you know, feelings toward us. How did you, or did you ever have to deal with a concerned and an upset community against the police officer, the police force? Did you ever have to deal with that?
A lot of times, and sometimes it may not directly involving Charlotte. Like I said, something that happens in LA or Atlanta drifts over into North Carolina also. And you'll hear that feedback from the community, you know, as they always, you know, you see the people in movies now, people are throwing their hands up, you know, even doing the marches, you know, because people may have fired their weapon and the person, you know, and the kid or individual they shot didn't even have a weapon. So I think that we all have to, not only is the public on high alert, but the officers on high alert too, because it's a tough time right now. You know, I've ran into former officers or some that were a little younger than me that were still on, and they said, "Boy, you probably wouldn't want to come back in police right now." You know, I get lots of calls all the time in reference to certain situations, like, "Talk to me through this. What happened?" And it's hard to do that sitting now at home. Uh, I do believe this. There's lots of mistakes that have been made, and even with Man Down, I still stand by. I think that could have been handled totally different. You know, my colleague
Yeah,
from LA, he talks about, uh, maybe if the officer had not gone back to the car and he'd been the one, Lonzo would have been the one to handle that situation, kid might have been alive, you know. So, but I
yeah.
think that a lot of times daily we have to deal with that. The public, they are very aware and in tune what's going on. And as you know, I work the West Side. They weren't afraid to verbalize it.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. And you know what I found interesting, Mr. Horton, is that you said one of your twin sons is a police officer. So I know I have talked to other people who are police officers, and they tell their kids, please do not become a police officer during this time. So talk to me about the conversation you had with your twin son of being a police officer. Did you try to talk him out of it, or this is what's his calling, his passion? Talk to me about that.
Uh, Great question. I didn't know that he was interested, and he kind of did the same thing that I did. He went to UNC Charlotte, and as I told you, I became a police officer at the age of 32. He became a police officer at the age of 31. And he
Wow.
told me, yeah, so he told me that he was watching me. They always say kids are always watching. You never know who's got their eye on you. And the way I was living my life and how things were going. And there was lots of conversation all the time with me being a police officer. When I was an auto theft detective, I remember having one of them at an interview, and the kid was like 13, my son was 14. Kid had stolen a car, right? And I would use some of those examples as real hard life examples. So I did not have a conversation. I did not try to talk him out of it. I was very happy to see him do it. I remember he was here in Charlotte. So I went to the graduation. I saw some old friends of mine, and they said, Arthur, I said, my son, and they were very happy. He's no longer here. He transferred to Hickory, North Carolina, and now presently with Hudson Police Department, become the first African-American police officer at that little small police department. But at that time, I was all for it. My younger brother, he had great support. And so it was all a positive conversation. I never did try to talk him out of it. I didn't see a reason not to at that time.
Good, good, good. Well, we need more good police officers. Good, good. So Jonathan, talk to me about what did not make it into the film. I guess it was like 15 minutes. Was there a lot on the cutting floor, or is there something else that you, after viewing it, that you said, man, I should have added that line in there? Talk to me about the creativity, and talk about what you wanted to put in there, did put in there, or what you could have changed. Talk to me about that a little bit.
Wow, thank you for that. Yeah, there's actually a longer cut of the film. Actually, my initial cut of the movie was a little bit over 30 minutes.
Wow.
And so for this particular cut, because this is my thesis film at LMU, I, kind of get what was the meat and the potatoes of the story that I was trying to say for this version of the movie. But actually, the movie does really go beyond where we ended in this version, and just following Alonzo's decision after he said what he said, and just dealing with Clark further, and more of a climactic ending. That would be way more deserving of what the audience, in my opinion, would want to see, like a showdown type of thing. But I think the quiet ending that I chose for this cut is something that really resonates with people a little bit more, and just the internal struggles of having to code switch, in a sense, right? As Black people, we have to code switch naturally in our environments with white people and people of other cultures. But here, in blue, there's a blue code as well that a lot of officers have to live by. Not only just being integral to themselves, just adapting their environments. I was even told, like, being on the force as a Black person can be similar to just existing or still around white people in that same setting. So you have to make yourself comfortable enough to them in a way where they feel like you're on their side and not, an outsider. So that was something that was just an interesting dynamic dealing with part of the story, and just humanizing the characters more.
Wow, wow. And talk to me about the young people, because at the dinner table, the daughter was real engaged, and I guess was reading the news. I guess she was up on her current events, and she was not afraid to express her feelings toward that officer. Was that intentional, and was that a message to say that young people, if we want things to continue to change, that they need to be involved and ask the questions that need to be asked? Talk to me about that.
Yes, I feel like the daughter definitely represented the radical view of most of the Black community, especially the new generation that exists today. We exist in a time when people speak up and really stand up for injustice, especially since last June, with what happened in our country with George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and so on. That idea that we're not going to take it, we really want some answers. Why is this a problem? Why has this been a problem for so many years, and why aren't anybody trying to rectify it? It's definitely what she represents. And also being a cop's daughter is an interesting perspective from her retrospective, from the other cop's daughter who's totally on her dad's side and doesn't believe he did anything wrong, but he was just protecting himself, and just not understanding how that plays into being both Black and blue, and the dynamics of being, a Black man on the force, and just dealing with trauma on both ends.
Yeah. Trauma indeed. Mr. Horton, tell me, when you were on the force, was mental health, was that stress, was that taken care of? When you were on the force, if you were having a traumatic day, was it cool for you to say, hey, I need somebody to talk to? Did they have an employee assistance program? Did they have anything like that when you were on the force?
They had some of that, but I don't think it was really advocated a lot in reference to taking care of your mental health. I would depressurize a lot by going home and thinking about the day, especially if I was in a stressful situation, and think about things that I did that day and whether or not I could have done anything better or differently. That was my depressing, just the digression and depressing. But I talked to a counselor one time during a traumatic situation, but it had nothing to do with it. It was a really, really bad car accident. And that was the only time that they reached out to me and suggested, or it was mandatory that I sit down and talk to someone. Of course, I never was involved in a fatal shooting, so I can't really speak for that those individuals had. I would suspect that they probably talked to someone at that time.
Yeah. And when you watched the film, Mr. Horton, did it bring up anything? Did it bring up some anxiety, or did it? What did it do to you when you saw the film? Even though you were never involved with a fatal shooting, but I guess that the cop talk and the you're my partner and things like that. So did it bring up anything inside of you watching the film? Any emotions?
The young kid, the deceased young man, obviously articulate, intelligent. And I thought about my daughter, who just finished her freshman year at University of Southern California. And she would be one of those individuals that would challenge an officer, especially when she knows she hadn't done anything wrong. So that made me think about that conversations that I continue to have with her, and tell her a lot of times that is not the time to have that debate or that discussion. You probably just need to do what the officer is instructing you to do and live the fight another day. We'll deal with it tomorrow. Even if you get arrested, then you go ahead and get arrested. But I just think that the young kid I think some officers get pushed the wrong way. It's kind of like he talking about his wife pushing the wrong button. You know how to push my button. Well, that young kid kind of pushed his button. He let it get to him a little bit because, he's looking at him maybe wanting to be in total control. And as officers, we do have to be in control to a certain degree. Approaching that young guy who had picked the description of a suspicious person, you have to also take in consideration that when the officers approach him, we have no idea who that individual is. And there is a level of protection that we have to have on ourselves and make sure we have total control of that situation. But I can see my daughter trying to engage in that conversation. I don't think that would be a good thing. Just, answer the questions and then, give me the ID, you come back clean, and then you go on about your merry way.
Yeah. And I guess that's something that we probably need to stress now, because I know in talking to another police officer, they say that if you feel wronged, make sure you jot down the officer, his badge number, and then you can file a complaint instead of mouthing off and things like that. But then I have another question. With the space that we're in, Mr. Horton, where everybody is woke, everybody is aware, do you think that police officers can still remain in control, knowing that what they're up against? You know what I mean? So, so now that the space that we're in, do you find police officers are going to take a little bit more than they didn't take several years ago? So they may take a little bit of mouthing off because, we don't want to make the national headlines. We don't want, CNN to come and cover our whole police department. So talk to me about the space and moving forward, and, will police officers take a little bit more now than that they didn't before?
Well, obviously with the camcorders and the video on the officer's lapel, the cell phones is always out there. I'm surely they're very aware of that. To answer your question, I think they may take a little bit more because they just don't want to be in IA tomorrow, But then there has to be that balance there, because your safety is always first. And I'm speaking from a police officer. My safety always comes first, because I do want to go home to my family that evening, just like you do. But I think there will be some latitude there. It may be, because of, like you said, making the national news, maybe there may be, a little bit more leeway there. But I think the officers always will stress that they are in control at that time when you have that encounter. Even if you just get pulled over for running a red light, again, as you make that approach to the car, you still have no idea who that individual is. When I hear news reporters talk about, it was a routine traffic stop. I don't like that term. There's nothing routine about it. There really isn't, because you just don't know.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'll write that down. Routine. Yeah, good stuff. Jonathan, talk to me about what did it take to make this film? How did you find the actors? Did you, I guess you wrote the script, and, talk to me about how did you make it all happen? Because did you use an iPhone? How did you make it all happen to make it look so clean?
Well, yeah, it was a process. So in the writing stages, I actually wrote this in the spring semester prior to shooting this, and then actually shot this in the fall of 2019, and then did some pickups at the top of 2020, right before the pandemic started. So thank God I was able to wrap the movie before we all went into lockdown, a few weeks later.
Then you could edit. You edited in lockdown, yeah.
Yeah, that was very hard. It was very difficult. The shooting part went pretty well. Casting to me was very tedious and long, but necessary, and just finding who were my main characters, right? They were probably the last to be cast, were the two officers were the last to be cast, and just really making sure whoever I brought on board really did justice to the internal struggles that were going on and the dynamics between the two, because it also was important that they had to feel like they've been friends for a long time, right? So just finding the chemistry between the actors was something that I've been dealing with for a long time. I casted almost, I want to say maybe like almost 6 months for this straight. So it was a very serious, intense process during the casting. And then when it all came together, ended up shooting this on an Arri Alexa, which is like standard camera definition. It was like 4K. So to make sure we just had a crisp, clean look of the film, so it could be, presented the right way and professionally as well. And the editing process, dealing with COVID made it a little difficult, because normally when you're editing films and being in film school, you can use, the campus equipment from, studio equipment for post-production. And here, since we were in lockdown, I found myself just having to edit on laptops and just send it over, the file over to the mixer to have it mixed down and different things. And thank God the mixer on my film, he actually, had a studio, because his dad worked for, Disney, had a studio in his house, so he was able to mix it professionally, where a lot of my other classmates, they weren't able to, just dealing with COVID restrictions and just having to, listen to everything on the laptop. So in the end, I'm glad this version of the movie came out so well and it's being received, because it definitely was a triumph in itself, just trying to make it happen, especially during the pandemic.
Yeah, good. And a question for you, Jonathan, did you have a conversation with the characters, the cast, and did y'all talk about police community and where their thoughts were, or did someone agree with the police officer that he should have used deadly force? Describe to me the conversations that you had with your cast and characters about this. How did they feel about it?
Absolutely. With any film I do, I always talk to my actors just to see if there's any personal experiences there, what ties into how they deal with it. And definitely the officer that played Clark O'Connor, he definitely has law enforcement in his family. So definitely he knew a lot of terminology already when the scene of panic and just calling for backup and different terminology that he already was privy to on set, and just the anxiety and the paciness of just what he was doing in the role. And, it's the actor's responsibility to really breathe life into these characters and really do the research to form these relationships and bonds that are gonna need to come off authentic on camera. So, all that plays into it. And then, everyone, of course, knew why they were a part of this film. It was important that we tell this narrative in a respectful but realistic way, and really leave the audience, with a mind of openness and thinking, and how we can be more progressive in these situations going forward when, you unexpectedly do come across things like this, because no one plans to be murdered or, to be harassed or vice versa, so you just want to be more thoughtful when you go into any of these situations.
Yeah, and we're going to wrap this up. Thank you. This has been a very good conversation. You said that this was for a project, Jonathan. So tell me, what was the feedback? What has the feedback been like?
Yes, this was my thesis film in film school. And
yes.
The feedback's been amazing. People really gravitate to the movie. In my opinion, this is probably like one of my more, my best film at this point right now. I'm really proud of the growth I've had as a filmmaker and a storyteller, with this project. And it's important that, as an artist, we reflect the times that we live in. And going into this movie, filming it, in the script, I was talking about 2020, but I had no idea what 2020 was going to do, actually. So I was just like, I've been wanting to tell this narrative for a couple of years, and, I wrote 2020 into the script, not really knowing what's going on, but I was hoping like, are we out of the way of what's going on with the police brutality and stuff? And then midway through shooting it, things are happening again with Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, all that stuff is happening at the top of, 2020. And, the film ended up being very timely today and being more impactful. So as an artist, I was glad I was able to reflect the times with my work and actually use my platform to speak and showcase, people in a different light, and also have a conversation piece. I think film is important to have a conversation piece and using your platform that way. And I definitely want to use any film to, enlighten.
Absolutely, absolutely. We're going to wrap this up soon. Mr. Horton, tell me, I guess final question, do you think things will get better or stay the same when it comes to community and policing, or how police treats the community? Talk to me, what is your gut saying? Because I guess a lot of stuff is happening and a lot of people are aware, and you had people calling defunding police and using money instead of more police officers. Maybe we need more counselors, or maybe we need more de-escalators to come out there. Talk to me. What is your gut saying about where things are headed?
I actually believe that it will get better. It has to get better. The police departments across the country, I'm sure they're all under the microscope right now, and I'm sure that they're trying to implement programs and things in place to help officers do their job, a better way. But defunding the police, that is not the right thing to do. Um, like you said, I think we need more. We have to saturate, all of the areas with more police. I think that giving them more tools to do their job better. But my gut feeling is that it has to get better. It really has to. I don't really have the true answer for that, but yeah, my gut feeling is that it will get better at some point in time.
Gotcha. I didn't know if you had your crystal ball over there and you saw what your crystal ball was saying. Yeah. Thank you. Hey, Jonathan. Oh, go ahead. Hey, Jonathan. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was just saying I'm an optimist. I just got to believe that it'll get better. So.
Yes, sir. I'm right there with you. Jonathan, tell me what's next for you. Are you going to make another film? I guess this is your occupation. Tell me what's next for you.
Yes, I actually just wrapped a new film, actually totally different, non-political, controversial. I did a horror film called Children of Night, and it's a supernatural vampire movie about this house sitter named Deja Clark, and she takes a gig for her next semester in college, house sitting for the Celestial's power couple, the Sinclairs, and what she discovers is that they're secretly vampires, and it becomes a cat and mouse game of her survival from the end of the night. And I just wrapped that last month, so hopefully that could be in the festival circuit sometime next year. And then also I have a few more projects coming up later half of this year, and also just got another project that I just released about Black men and suicide called Breathe, that's hitting the festival circuit. Just started this month. So I'm very excited about my journey into film. I love directing. And, just the goal is to keep creating art, creating conscious content and Black-centric films that can really gravitate towards many people, help people see a different version of themselves or someone they see similar, and just, not enlighten while also entertaining.
Gotcha. Thank you. We're going to wrap up 30 seconds. Mr. Horton, tell me any final remarks, comments about Man Down, about takeaways and call to action.
Jonathan, I wanted to commend Jonathan on that short story there. I'm a history buff. I like watching police-related shows, ones that are more realistic. So I've enjoyed being able to participate in this segment here. And so.
Thank you, Mr. Horton. And Jonathan, kudos to you. Great job. Talk to me about your final remarks, any takeaways, and what do you think after people watch the film? What do you think the call to action is? Help us out.
The call to action to me is understanding and coming together at the end of the day. It's just understanding that the stress is on both ends, right? And humanizing, you know, the police as well. You know, they're people are people too. And there's a fear that we must acknowledge on both ends, is that when you come into the relationship with fear, you can't expect a positive outcome, you know? And so just understanding that and trying to build a gap in that sense is very integral and important to, you know, the narrative of this movie. And then one more thing I will say is that also in the festival, I do have another film. It's called Shank's Ring, which is like a music video hybrid that you guys can check out too, and just see a different version, you know, outside of Man Down, which also deals with, you know, relationship dynamics as well, you know, within our community. So yeah, so just different takeaways from just film in general, and film is meant to just present a new perspective in a way that you never thought or looked at before.
Okay. Well, thank you, Jonathan Rowan, creator of Man Down, and thank you, Arthur Horton, former CMPD detective, and thanking you for your insight and your perspective. It really made the difference. Thank you to both, and thank you to Tommy Nichols, Black Charlotte Film Festival, the 11th anniversary. So check it out. It could change your life. All right. Thank you so much. Y'all have a great day. Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.